This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Yod Gimel Baruch Hashem, concluding the first parak of Menachos. It's wild how the Dafim just go. Hopefully we're getting a greater appreciation for Kachim day by day, understanding a little bit more. We're holding on the bottom of Yud Beis and Beis at the Mishnah. And we're really in the middle of discussing Pigol, or we should say in a more broader strokes, Machshavos Zarais, intentions, whether they do parcel up the carbon, whether they don't parcel up the carbon. So until now, we've been discussing cases that do parcel up the carbon. But now begins the Mishnah on the bottom of the base of my base. Lecho kechatzi zayis. If someone has in mind to eat a chatzi zayis or and ulehekter kechatzi zayis, and to burn a chatzi zayis. Each of these, the kavana is to do it limachar, as Rashi towards the bottom, the Amid spells out limachar. What's the din? Kosher. Why? She'ein achila v'haktara mitztarfin. Because the two of these do not combine. And the simple understanding here is that it's only parcels up the carbon if there's a zayis worth of an issue. Over here, there's no one zayis, but rather there's a half a kazayis and a half a kazayis, and therefore, says the Mishnah, the two do not combine to parcel up, or rather, this carbon will be kosher. Says the Gemara. Now let's do some math. We have this Mishnah, and we have the previous Mishnah. So says the Gemara, let's weigh the two Mishnayos together. Taima, what's the reason of our Mishnah that they do not combine? Would indicate halechol. But if there are two kavanos of eating a chatzi zayis and eating a chatzi zayis, davar she'ein darkei lechol, something that's not normally eaten, the kemitza, it would sound like it is mitzarif. Meaning the Gemara is being medayik that it sounds like the issue in our Mishnah is that it's a chatzi zayis of achila and a chatzi zayis of aktara. But if there would be two chatzi zayisim within the realm of achila, sound like it is mitzarif. What's the kasha? Bakatani reisha. But the previous Mishnah taught us lechol davar shedar kol lechol lahaktir davar shedar koi lahaktir davar shedar kol lechol in shein dar kol lechol loi. We see clear that it's only mitzarif in as much as a davar that's dar kol lechol. But something that's ein dar kelecha, like the kemitza, would not be mitzarif. So asks the Gemara, man Tana. So who is the Tana of our Mishnah that seemingly indicates, it's true, albeit via diuk, but our Mishnah seemingly indicates that afilu, even something she'ein dar kelecha, is considered significant. Amr Rav Yirmiyah Hamani Rav Elazar he our Mishnah Ishitas Rabbi Eliezer Damar Mechashem Achilas Adam Lachilas Mizbeach Machilas Mizbeach Lachilas Adam. Rav Eliezer holds that the term achila, we have this in Zvachim, of course, is not necessarily only mean eating. It means consumption. And what is the definition of consumption? Definition of consumption is ridding the item. I could rid the item via consuming it in my stomach, or I could rid the item via consuming it on the Mizbeach. They're both being rid of. They're both being consumed. So says Rav Eliezer, they're both considered, you could be machshav from one to the next. Titinan, as we learned in the Mishnah, hakoimeit as a mincha. So does the kemitza lechol davar shein dar koi lechol like davar shein dar koi lahaktir. Tanakama holds it's kosher because they don't combine. Rav Eliezer poisel. Eliezer says it's basel that such a kavana is significant. So our Mishnah is going to be Rav Eliezer The previous Mishnah is the Tanakama or the Chachamim. Teretz number 1 of Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah explaining that the Tana of our Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. Continues the Gemara. Abaye Omar teaches Abaye. Afilu Teim, I'll even tell you it is the Rabbanan. Afilu Teima Rabbanan. Loi Teima, don't say Halechol V'lechol. Davar Shein Darga Lechol. Don't say that the diuk of our Mishnah is 2 types of achila, one of them being a davar she'ein darkei lechol, like the kemitza. Eleima, halechol, velechol, davar she'darkei lechol. Says the Gemara, but then what's the chiddush? It's mamish a regular case of achila. Umayka mashmlan. We said explicitly, lechol g'zayis b'achot, g'zayis l'mach, g'zayis l'mach, g'zayis b'achos. K'chatz chayis b'achot, k'chatz l'mach, k'chatz l'mach, k'chatz b'zos. Pasal vein by karis. So says the Gemara, we already said this. Hasu lamali, as we turn over to Yud Gimel and Aleph. Why would we need this case? So says the Gemara, very nice, you Abaye want to argue with Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah said we're going with Rav Eliezer. You, Abaye, want to argue and you want to say no. We're even going with the Chachamim. You know why? Because the diak of our Mishnah is not a davar she'ein darkei lechol, but rather davar she'darkei lechol. Says the Gemara. But you already learned that. What's the chiddush? So we turn over to Gimel Amud Aleph and says the Gemara, Ilech of lechol, davar she'ein darkei lechol, kamashlan de mitzaref. Then Merisha Shmas Mila. Writing that from the Risha. Ilechol La'aktir. Midiuka Derisha Shmas. I already knew that. Dahashta. Because now, Malechol Lechol Davar She'ein Darkei Lechol. Amr Loi Mitzarif. Lechol La'aktir Mi Bayi. So says the Gemara, according to Abaye, how we explaining what the chiddush of our Mishnah is in contrast to the chiddush of the previous Mishnah. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you what the teretz is. Yes, Lechol Haktir Tzichle, we indeed need to teach us the din of Lechol Haktir. Why? Salka Daitachamina, I would have thought. You would have thought that over there, you know why the two kavanas do not combine? Because it's something. It's not normal. The kemitza is not meant to be eaten. It's meant to be burnt on the mizbeach. But by us, Tibahai ki orchei kamechashev. Ubahai ki orchei kamechashev. But by us, now what are we discussing? We're discussing having kavana to eat something which is eaten and to burn something which is normal. So therefore, that's why you would have thought it's not the same, and rather ema litztaref. And that's why, says the Gemara, Kamash Malon, that's the Chiddush. The Chiddush teaches us that these two Kavanais, even though they're Kiorche, they're quote-unquote normal, still, they do not combine. Hadron Allah, Kol HaMenachos. Fabulous start to an incredible Masechta. And we continue straight into the next Mishnah with a very large, mindful detail. That it's time to chazer. Says the Mishnah, someone does the kemitza. Someone does the kemitza. We're really continuing on the theme of machshavos zaros. We spoke about just moments ago. We spoke about combining two machshavos, but we go back to the root din back in Daf Yud Aleph. It was a machshava to eat the shirayim lemachar, or to burn the kemitza, the levaina lemachar. And in those dinim, we said those are real pegol, the yesh by paris. But now, says our Mishnah, you did the kemitza and you had intent lechol shiareh, or lahakter kaimatza lemachar, to eat the remnants or burn the kaimatza the next day. Moide Rabbi Yosi bazeh shehu pegol. In this case, Rav Yosi says, indeed, it was pigol v'chayavin alav kares. Lahaktir levaynasa lemachar. If the intent was to burn the levayna the next day, Rav Yosi Aimer, pasol vein by kares. But in this case, pigol chayavin alav kares. So says the Mishnah, what's this machlekes chachamim and Rav Yosi? Amrulai, the Chachamim, who say there's yes kares. In the case of burning the levayna, say to Rav Yosi, I don't understand. Mashinu yizem min hazevach. What is this any different than a zevach? Why is burning the levayna any different than burning a carbon? The halacha is, if you have a machshava to be makriv the carbon lemachar, everyone agrees it's pigol, and avada there's kares. So why frekta chachamim to Rav Yosi? Why is this case going to be any different? Amar lehen, Rav Yosi responds, Shazevach, I'll tell you the difference. Shazevach damai ubesarai veimurav. When it comes to the zevach, the carbon itself, the dam and the imurim, the meat, are all considered one part, echad, ulevayna eina min ha-mincha. Whereas when it comes to the levayna, it's a separate entity. So why, as we always say, this is a chiluk, this is a difference. Why this chiluk is mechalek, why this difference is practically relevant, is something we're going to have to figure out. But says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, you know what the chiluk is? That by a zevach, by an animal, it's all part of one entity. The meat, the flesh, the blood, it's all from the animal. But here, what's the levayna? The levayna is a separate entity. So that's why Rav Yosi holds the din is going to be different. Says the Gemara, Lama li lemisni maider Rav Yosi bazu. Why do we need the first part of the Mishnah? The Rav Yosi is maskim that when we have a mincha, that the kemitza was done with a machshava for lemachar, it's pigol, and there's kares. What's the Havamina? Rav Yosi disagrees. Explains the Gemara, Mishum the Kabbalah, Misni Seifa. It's setting it up. We wanted to say at the end of the Mishnah, Lak Levanas Lemachar. Rav Yosi Amar Basel Vein by Kares. So Ma'udetema. I would have thought, Rav Yosi, Ma'udetema, excuse me. Time of the Rav Yosi, what's the reason of Rav Yosi? Mishum the Kasavar. Ein mefalgin bechatzi matir. Maybe Rav Yosi is arguing with the Yisaid. Maybe Rav Yosi is arguing and he's saying that there's no pigol with regarding a chatzi matir, regarding a half of a matir, that over here the levayna is not the full carbon. So maybe there's no pigol in such a case, and therefore vafilu reisha nami, and maybe that's why. Maybe it's not because the levayna is a separate entity, but maybe the kemitza as well would be that. We'll take for one moment Rashi before we turn over the Amid. Look at the last line in the Gemara in Mefagi b'chatzi matir. Shevchishi lavela macher avodas chatzi matir. That's where perhaps Rav Yosi would argue, and we turn over to the Gimel Beis. And that's why the Mishnah set up and taught both dinim to teach us Kamash Malan Tibeha Moide. Then in this case, indeed, Rav Yosi is Moide. Continues the Gemara, the two dots, the top line of your Gimel Beis. Lakter Levanas Lamacher Rav Yosi Aimer Pasal Vein by Kares. It's the case which Rav Yosi argues. Amareish Lakish. Amareish Lakish. Aimer Haya Rav Yosi. Rav Yosi used to say, Ein matir mifagel es a matir. One matir cannot create pigol for another matir. If you're having intent for a different part of the carbon, it's not going to create pigol. That's why Rish Lakish is explaining the Yisai, the crux of Rav Yosi. that your machshava about the levina does not affect what's happening. There's no karis. Why? Because you're bringing the kemitza right now. So while bringing the kemitza, the machshava and the levina is not going to mess you up. 4 lines down, and similarly we can say b'shem zich levina shalech v'aponim shematir mafagel es amatir, that if while burning the levina he has kavana about the other levina, the other bazich, the other spoonful, it's also not pickle. Pickle has to be a machshava on the carbon, on the avodah that you're doing right now. Says the Gemara, what's this additional case of the 2 spoonfuls of levina? It's mamish, the exact same case. Explains the Gemara. I would have thought time of the Rav Yosi b'levina is why mishad delav mina de minchahi. It's a different min, it's a different entity. That the mincha is flour, the levina is incense. Vol b'shem zich levina de mina de adadi ninu, they're the same item. Maybe indeed one bagel could affect each other. Kamash Malan, that it does not. Frag the Gemara, Mimat says, Amra, time there, can you say that that's not the reason? But the Mishnah, Bakadani, what did the end of the Mishnah say? Seifa. Amr lechem said mashi nasa min hazevach, and Amr lehen, what was the response? Rav Yosi at the end of the Mishnah, hazevach damo b'zar ve'emuru mechad, u'levayin eina min ha-mincha. Ma eina min ha-mincha? What did Rav Yosi mean? Says the Gemara, l'chayra. Excuse me, that's part of the teretz. So, Frag the Gemara, what do we see? We see that Rav Yosi taught us the reason that it's not part and parcel the same item. One's the levina, one's the mincha. So, why would you think that the reason for Rav Yosi is because the amina de mincha? And why would you think, it's any other reason? Explains the Gemara, I'll tell you why. My eina min mincha. What did the Mishnah mean that the levina is not part of the mincha? I would have thought eina be'ikov mincha. It's not being held back with the mincha until the kaimetz is brought. Delav ki'echi dema'akiv lehu kaimetz lishi rayim. We do not say that just like the kemitza holds back the shirayim, the kema kaimetz because in as much as the kaimetz was not brought, the shirayim are not permitted. So to achinami makiv levina, do the same thing by the levina. We do not say that ella ibai hai maktir bereisha, ibai hai maktir bereisha. Either one can be brought first. The Rabbanan are you ki'amirin matir mafagel. As hamatir say the Rabbanan is hanimili echad boi bechad mana. It's only when they were not in one mana, one vessel of echad boi bechad mana kechad dami, and therefore say the Chachamim, the 2 parts of this carbon will indeed factor one to the next. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Yanai teaches Rav Yanai. Lika levina bizar puzzle. If the gathering of the levina is done by a zar, it is puzzle. Says Rav Yanai that pulling together the levina is called an ikar avoda, and it has to be done by a kohen. Says the Gemara, my time, Rav Yirmiyah mishamay lacha. Naguba, you know why? Because it's like halacha carry the carbon. Kasavar halacha shleiberagel shema halacha. So we think that carrying without moving your feet is called carrying, and therefore halacha bezar psula. So to over here, the levina cannot be brought by a zar. Amar Amari Avananai Tanina says Amari. I learned in the Mishnah. Zaklal This is a Mishnah from the previous daf. Kol ha'koymetz noisin b'kli v'amoylev ha'maktir. So Mishnah ha'koymetz hainu shoichet. I understand that the kamitza is paralleled by the shchita. Moylech lami hainu moylech. That's the moylech. Maktir hainu zayrik. The aktoras of the minchas like the zrik of the dam. El noisin b'kli ma'ika of it. What is this putting the mincha into the vessel? Ilim shad the dami lekabolo. It's like catching the blood. Mi dami asa memela. There you're catching the blood's falling on its own. Hachaka shakal varami. Here you're placing in the flour. Elamisham the kiman l'sagile. To have it lost, it's impossible to have a carbon without putting it in the vessel. Avoida chashuvahi. It's considered a full-fledged avoida. Al karcha meshavale ki alacha. Excuse me, al karcha meshavale ki kabbalah. That the reason is because it's integral. It's going to be like halacha, and that's the raya of the Gemara, that if the levina is pulled together by a zar, it's going to be pasul. Says the Gemara, no raya, loilam de dami lekabbalah, kakashalach, and you're asking, you're asking, over there the blood drips on its own, over here you have to place it into the klisharis. Kashakal v'rami mechti. Tervayu kedushas klihu mali memela mali kashakal v'rami. What was that whole avamina? What was the svara? Because the dam falls on its own, and this you have to place it into chilik. Says the Gemara, it's one and the same, and therefore there's no chilik at all, and therefore we don't have a raya. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from the Mishnah of the Siyata Dishmaya.